They saw a black woman in first class and assumed it had to be a mistake. That was the moment everything began to unravel. What they didn't know, what they never even thought to consider, is that their arrogance was about to cost them everything. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She didn't need to. Because the most dangerous person in the room is never the one who demands attention. It's the one they tried to ignore. At 35,000 feet, in a world built on silent hierarchies and polished prejudice, she was exactly where she was meant to be. And by the time they realized who she really was, it was too late. This isn't just a story about bias. It's a reckoning wrapped in quiet power. If you believe respect should never be determined by skin color, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that cut deep, and tell us where you're watching from. What would you have done if they looked at you and only saw what they feared? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is the story they never saw coming. Richard Randall Drexler III had always seen the world as a pyramid, with himself firmly at the top. As the CEO of a Fortune 100 tech conglomerate, he was used to commanding boardrooms, silencing senators, and bending outcomes with nothing more than a frown. So when he stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 729 bound for Washington, D.C., he carried with him an aura of assumed dominance. The smell of leather seats, the glint of polished brass, and the soft clink of glasses reminded him of where he belonged, among the powerful, the entitled, the elite. Adjusting the cuffs of his dark blue Zegna suit, he approached seat 2A, expecting the usual pleasantries and space to stretch out. Instead, he saw her, Maya Ellington, already seated in 2B. A black woman, alone, composed, dressed in a navy-tailored suit that somehow managed to command attention without demanding it. Her posture was effortless, her gaze locked on the digital tablet in her hands, stylus moving steadily across its surface, as if she had already blocked out the noise of the world. Randall stopped short, brows creasing into confusion that quickly morphed into disdain. He turned slightly toward the flight attendant, a blonde woman named Laura, whose smile froze mid-sentence as she noticed the tension building. "This seat's supposed to be empty," Randall said without greeting, his voice carrying the sharpness of entitlement. Laura consulted her manifest, her screen lighting up briefly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Drexler," she said with forced calm. "Ms. Ellington is confirmed in 2B. All seats in first class have been assigned." Randall let out a short breath, one of disbelief more than frustration. "So you're telling me," he began slowly, eyes still fixed on Maya, "that this is correct? She's actually seated next to me." His tone dropped the final words like an insult. Maya didn't look up. She tapped once more on her tablet, unbothered, her serenity only adding fuel to Randall's ego. "Mr. Drexler," Laura said, still trying to keep her voice level, "I assure you, all assignments were finalized this morning. I can check with the gate if you'd like." Randall shook his head. "No need. It's already clear where standards have slipped." "What's next?" "Lottery winners in the cockpit." Several nearby passengers looked over, some with subtle frowns, others simply curious. Still, Maya remained composed. Without lifting her head, she calmly said, "You're welcome to request a seat change if you're so uncomfortable." The line cut through Randall's bravado like a wire. He narrowed his eyes, leaning slightly toward her. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, voice quiet but pointed, as if daring her to engage. Maya finally looked up, her eyes calm, unblinking. "Unfortunately," she replied, "I do." Randall's jaw clenched at her tone, not disrespectful, but loaded with precision. He turned again to Laura, who stood frozen. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "This is what happens when you let political correctness invade the sky." Laura, clearly uncomfortable, said, "Mr. Drexler, if you'd like to file a service complaint after landing, I can arrange." "Save it," Randall snapped, sinking into 2A with exaggerated drama. From the breast pocket of his jacket, he pulled out an expensive bottle of Tom Ford cologne and sprayed it twice into the air between him and Maya. "God," he muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "can't stand certain smells." Maya's expression didn't change, but the grip on her stylus tightened slightly. Randall, emboldened by what he mistook as silence, pulled out his phone and made a call. Yeah, he said loudly into the receiver. You won't believe this. First class. Packed. Next thing you know, they'll let in raffle winners. No standards anymore. Just inclusion theater. His eyes flicked to Maya with every sentence, baiting her, waiting for some kind of outburst. None came. Across the aisle, a young businessman with a wedding band and weary eyes finally said, "That's enough." Randall turned slowly, as if daring him to continue. "Excuse me." The man didn't flinch. "You heard me. You're embarrassing yourself." Randall smirked. "And you are?" Someone who still understands basic decency. A few passengers murmured their agreement. An older woman near the window whispered to her seatmate, "I like her," nodding toward Maya. The engines began to roar beneath them as the plane taxied toward the runway. Maya, unfazed, resumed scrolling her tablet. Randall leaned back, scoffing, but said no more. He thought the battle was over. He had no idea it had just begun. The aircraft lifted gently into the sky, climbing through soft layers of cloud. But the tension in seat row 2 remained firmly grounded. Randall shifted in his leather seat as if the air itself had betrayed him by not filtering out the presence he found so offensive. His cologne lingered heavily in the air between them, a blend of cedarwood, arrogance, and control. But if he was expecting Maya to flinch or cough in discomfort, he was mistaken. She remained still, her eyes calmly locked on her screen, her jaw tight but unreadable. Randall glanced over again, his eyes narrowing as if attempting to pierce her composure with sheer disdain. He leaned back with exaggerated exasperation and reached for his phone. His fingers tapped the screen rapidly, his voice soon cutting through the low hum of cabin white noise. "Yeah, I'm on the flight now," he said, his tone deliberately loud and performative. "First class? Technically, yes. Experience? A joke." He paused as if awaiting a gasp that never came, then continued, "They've seated me next to some DEI experiment. I paid top dollar for this seat, and now I'm spending 4 hours pretending I don't smell poverty and politics next to me." Maya didn't move. Her hand slowly reached for her cup of water, the only tell that she even registered his words, but her expression remained cool, too cool for Randall's liking. A few rows behind them, a young couple exchanged glances. The man whispered something to his wife, and she shook her head silently, biting her lip. The atmosphere in first class had grown heavier, not from turbulence, but from the acidic discomfort of watching someone systematically attempt to humiliate a woman who hadn't said a word in retaliation. "I mean, really," Randall continued on the call, now more animated, "I should get a partial refund or at least a voucher. This is absurd. It's like paying for caviar and getting a canned tuna sandwich in a Gucci wrapper." The metaphor hung in the air like a bad smell, and for the first time Maya glanced up, not at him, but forward, toward the flight attendant moving through the cabin with the drink cart. Randall mistook it for a reaction, a win, a crack in the facade, and that only emboldened him. He leaned over again, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're quiet. That's good. Smart. You know your place." Maya slowly turned her head, locking eyes with him for one long second. No anger, no sarcasm, just a silent, chilling precision that said more than words ever could. Randall blinked, uncomfortable for the first time, then quickly masked it with a scoff. The flight attendant, Laura, reached their row. "Something to drink, MS. Ellington?" she asked, her voice more sincere now, having noticed the mounting tension. Maya offered a polite smile. "Just sparkling water, please." "Of course." Laura served her quickly, eyes flicking nervously toward Randall, who held up his empty glass. "Another bourbon," he grumbled. Laura nodded, but didn't smile this time. As she moved on, Randall muttered under his breath, "They cater better to her than they do to their shareholders." The jab was too soft for most to hear, but Maya caught it. She didn't respond, not because she hadn't crafted the perfect retort, but because she knew silence could be sharper than any blade. That's what unnerved Randall the most. He lived for reaction, for control, for the feeling of pushing people beneath him just far enough that they either crumbled or lashed out. But she did neither. She endured, and that made her dangerous. He turned back toward the window, frustration simmering beneath his tailored exterior. The clouds outside glowed orange in the late afternoon sun, a calm canvas that betrayed nothing of the storm he was trying to create inside the cabin. Several rows ahead, another attendant whispered something into her colleague's ear. Eyes glanced back toward Randall's seat. Murmurs grew. The cabin wasn't laughing anymore. The performance was growing stale. Randall noticed, and it rattled him. Unbelievable. His last whispered jab had gone unanswered, his call theatrics ignored, and now, unable to provoke a reaction, he reached for a different weapon. Institutional pressure. He pressed the service button. Laura appeared moments later, her expression neutral but alert. Randall leaned in, lowering his voice to a tone that mimicked concern but masked strategy. "I've tried to be civil," he began, gesturing slightly toward Maya without looking directly at her. "But I have very serious business matters to conduct during this flight. This environment is not conducive to focus. I'm requesting a quiet zone, or at the very least, a reassignment for the sake of passenger harmony." Laura hesitated. The request was absurd, but the weight of his last name carried more than mere suggestion. She nodded once, excused herself, and walked briskly toward the front galley. Maya watched her go, but said nothing. Her eyes returned to the glowing screen of her tablet, though her hand paused mid-scroll. Something had shifted. Minutes passed. Laura returned, this time accompanied by a senior male flight attendant named Alan. Older, gray at the temples, clipped in his movement. He crouched slightly beside Maya's seat, speaking softly but firmly. "Ms. Ellington, I hope your flight's been comfortable so far," he said, his voice rehearsed, pleasant but with a cadence of impending disruption. Maya looked at him, her expression unchanged. "It's been acceptable." Alan gave a tight smile. "We have a unique situation," he continued. "One of our VIPs has expressed discomfort and has requested space to concentrate on sensitive corporate matters. We'd like to offer you a premium seat in our forward business section. It's extremely quiet and more private." Maya's eyebrows raised slightly, the first visible sign of curiosity or skepticism. "You're asking me to leave my assigned seat? Why?" Alan shifted, choosing his next words carefully. "It's about balance," he said. "Cabin environment. Sometimes we have to be flexible for the overall experience." Maya glanced toward Randall, who pretended not to listen, but was clearly hanging on every word. She turned back to Alan. "And if I refuse?" Alan stood straighter, his smile thinning. "We'll of course honor your assignment, but it may complicate things for the crew, and we prefer to avoid tension." Maya nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition. "I see. It's not about my comfort. It's about his." Alan didn't reply. Maya tapped her stylus against the screen once, then locked her tablet and placed it neatly into the side pocket of her carry-on. "Get your captain," she said, her voice low, sharp, and without room for refusal. Alan blinked. "Excuse me." "The captain," Maya repeated. "If we're talking about operational priorities, I want to hear it from the person in command." Alan hesitated, then gave a curt nod and walked off. Randall finally turned his head and grinned smugly. "Look, it's nothing personal," he said with a condescending chuckle. "They're just trying to make the best of a delicate situation." Maya stared at him. "You've mistaken me for someone who seeks comfort over clarity." Randall raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be profound." "No," Maya replied, "just accurate." 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened and a tall man in a navy blue uniform emerged. His captain bars gleamed beneath the soft lighting. He approached their row with the solemnity of a judge and the weariness of a man who already suspected this wasn't going to end cleanly. "Good evening," he said, nodding to both. "I'm Captain Reynolds. I understand there's been a seating concern." Alan and Laura stood behind him like courtroom bailiffs. Maya gestured slightly. "Your crew asked me to move seats to accommodate a VIP. I'd like to know if that's your policy or your judgment." Captain Reynolds hesitated just long enough. "Our crew is trained to make decisions in the interest of in-flight harmony," he said. "And we do, from time to time, ask for flexibility in unique cases." "Unique meaning uncomfortable?" Maya asked, her voice smooth as silk but sharp enough to draw blood. "Unique meaning Sensitive, the captain replied. Some of our guests have high-level responsibilities. We ask others to consider that when feasible. Maya let the silence stretch. Then she asked evenly, "Would you have made this request if the man seated here were not Randall Drexler?" Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he said, "We'd be grateful for your cooperation." "I'm sure you would," Maya said, reaching for her seatbelt. "But gratitude is not a substitute for principle." She clicked the belt tighter. "I'm not moving." The captain looked at her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod and walked away. Alan and Laura followed. Randall leaned back, shaking his head, muttering, "So much for being reasonable." The captain had retreated without pushing further, but his avoidance had spoken louder than any apology. Maya was no longer simply enduring microaggressions. She was now sitting at the center of a coordinated attempt to quietly remove her under the guise of protocol. Randall Drexler, emboldened by the non-decision from authority, leaned back in his seat with a self-satisfied smirk, confident he had outmaneuvered her. He reached into his wallet and with deliberate flair pulled out a crisp $100 bill, placed it on the tray table between them, and slid it in her direction with 2 fingers. "Go on," he said, voice low and mocking. "Get yourself something nice and coach. Might even be able to buy a little peace and quiet for the rest of us." A few nearby passengers gasped softly, one woman covering her mouth, another man shaking his head, but choosing silence over confrontation. Maya looked at the bill for a moment, not in shock, but in calculation, then slowly picked it up, folded it neatly once, and placed it back on Randall's tray. "You should keep it," she said evenly. "You'll need it when the illusion of your value finally collapses." Randall's jaw tensed, but he chuckled dryly, as if dismissing her words before they could land. "You have a clever mouth," he said, "but clever doesn't buy you class or belonging." Maya didn't respond. She reached for her glass of water, brought it to her lips, and sipped slowly. Around them, the other passengers tried to look away, but couldn't. The moment had become a spectacle, a quiet war fought not with fists or shouting, but with contempt and silence. Then, as if on cue, the drink cart returned. Laura, the flight attendant who earlier failed to protect Maya's rights, now approached with 2 glasses of wine on her tray. She handed one to Randall with a tight smile, and with her other hand, reached across Maya's tray table to place another drink. But her wrist suddenly twisted just slightly, and the glass tipped. In a blink, a stream of dark red liquid cascaded across Maya's lap and chest, soaking into the navy fabric of her blazer like a stain meant to shame. "Oh my goodness," Laura gasped, tone laced with exaggerated horror. "I'm so sorry, that was no turbulence, but the seatbelt sign was off, and the air had been smooth for the last 100 miles. Maya stared down at her jacket, the wine dripping onto her tray, and slowly placed her glass back in its holder. Her hands moved with precision as she reached into her bag for a cloth, dabbing the liquid without haste, without panic. Not once did her eyes meet Laura's. Not yet. Randall watched, trying to hide the pleasure curling at the corners of his mouth. "Hate to see nice things ruined," he said, "but I suppose some people just attract mess." Laura made no move to help beyond a stiff offer of napkins, which Maya declined with a simple, "I've got it." Her voice remained calm, but this time there was a weight to it, a quiet thunder rolling just beneath the surface. The nearby businessman who had earlier defended her shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He looked toward Laura. "There was no turbulence," he said under his breath. Laura ignored him. Maya finished patting down her jacket, the fabric stained, but her dignity untouched. Then, slowly, she looked up, first at Randall, then at Laura. "Interesting." The cabin buzzed in soft murmurs, a current of discomfort moving through passengers who had witnessed the spectacle, but said nothing, who had heard Randall's voice and Laura's excuse, but found safety in silence. Maya had not moved since, not out of defeat, but out of choice, a conscious decision to absorb and observe, to hold herself together as the world around her quietly attempted to unmake her. Randall, on the other hand, was buoyed by his small victories. The wine, the silence, the lack of intervention. He leaned toward her now, no longer pretending civility, his voice low and venomous. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he said, tone too soft for others to hear. yet sharp enough to cut through armor. I see someone who thinks a couple of degrees and a tailored suit make her my equal. He gave a slow, disdainful smile. Newsflash, the real world doesn't work like that. You can educate yourself out of the projects, but you can't educate yourself into belonging. Maya didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap, wine-stained sleeves folded just so, as if nothing he said held the weight he wished it did. Randall mistook her silence again for weakness, for permission, for proof of his superiority. He turned his phone slightly away from her, swiping across the screen before opening a message window and beginning to dictate into his AirPods. Compose an email to customer relations, he instructed his assistant, who was listening on the other end. Subject: Executive Complaint Priority Account. Body: Today's flight experience has been severely compromised by your failure to uphold premium cabin standards. You've allowed your inclusivity obsession to override basic service protocols. I demand that moving forward, passengers with no verified business status or elite credentials be screened from first-class booking. He paused, his eyes flicking to Maya before adding, "No exceptions. I expect a written assurance that this will never happen again." His thumb hovered over the send button. He waited, almost as if hoping Maya would protest, give him some final reaction to justify the cruelty of his request, but when she didn't move, he tapped once. The message was gone. Maya inhaled slowly, deeply, her chest rising in one controlled motion before falling again. The pressure in the cabin hadn't changed, but something inside her had begun to shift. She had faced condescension before. She had seen the raised brows, heard the phrases carefully crafted to sound polite but poisoned with doubt. "You're very articulate. You're quite young to have come so far. You must have worked twice as hard." But this was a campaign, a coordinated, deliberate, strategic erosion of dignity masked as discomfort, framed as policy, enforced through silence. It wasn't just about Randall anymore. It was about every system in that aircraft that had either assisted him or refused to stop him. The attendant who spilled wine, the flight supervisor who asked her to move, the captain who justified it as sensitivity. All of them had built the same message: "You don't belong here." Randall, now emboldened beyond shame, leaned his head back, fingers steepled across his stomach, as if the world had just proven him right again. "You people never know when to walk away," he murmured, not caring who heard now. "That's the difference between privilege and permission. I was born for this seat. You were allowed to rent it." Briefly, Maya looked at him, just once. And in that glance, cool, detached, eerily calm, there was something that made Randall's smirk falter. He shifted, as if something had chilled the space between them. She didn't speak, didn't scold, didn't flinch. But there was something behind her gaze now, something Randall couldn't name, but instinctively didn't like. For the first time, he looked away first. The plane continued on its path, smooth and silent, flying eastward through golden skies. But within Maya, turbulence had begun to build, not the kind felt in the body, but the kind that settled into the bones, awakened by decades of watching men like Randall wear power like armor and wield cruelty without consequence. The wine, the seat reassignment attempt, the indifferent captain, the crew's empty professionalism. It had all pressed in from every side, reducing her presence to a tolerated inconvenience. Her breathing, once steady, began to shift, barely noticeable to the outside, but to her, it sounded like thunder inside her chest. Every second she remained silent felt less like composure and more like erosion. And yet, she said nothing. The world around her wanted reaction. She wouldn't give it that. Not yet. Across the aisle, Laura, the flight attendant, returned, this time with her mouth drawn tight and her arms folded across her pristine uniform. "Ms. Ellington," she said, leaning down slightly, her voice clipped and cold. "I'm going to ask you one last time. If you're unwilling to comply with the seating adjustment, I'll have no choice but to alert air security upon landing." Maya turned toward her slowly, her voice low and even. "My seat was never in question. I've complied with every policy, every request, and every humiliation. What exactly am I being accused of?" Laura hesitated, caught off guard by the clarity in Maya's tone. "You're creating discomfort," she said at last. "Some passengers have raised concerns about your presence and attitude." "What passengers?" Maya asked. Besides him, her eyes flicked to Randall, who now watched with a smug grin from behind his folded arms. Laura opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a voice rang out from the row behind Maya. "This is ridiculous," said a man in his early 30s, wearing a navy blazer and glasses. "She's done nothing wrong. I've watched the whole time. She hasn't raised her voice or moved from her seat. This man," he nodded toward Randall, "has been provoking her since takeoff." Laura turned sharply. "Sir, please stay out of it. This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," he replied. "You're threatening a woman for sitting in her assigned seat while letting him act like he owns the sky." A few passengers murmured in agreement. An older woman near the window said softly, "It's not right." Laura's eyes darted toward the front of the plane as if expecting backup, but none came. She turned back to Maya. "I'm warning you." "Warning me? Of what?" Maya asked, her voice firmer now. "That if I continue to exist quietly in a space someone like him finds offensive, I'll be removed? Is that what we're doing now?" Laura looked stunned. Randall leaned forward, voice gleeful. "Don't worry, they'll deal with you. People like you always overplay the victim card." Maya's lips parted slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to sorrow. She looked past Laura, past Randall, to the window where the sun was beginning to sink behind the clouds, painting the sky in streaks of soft orange and gold. She wondered, not for the first time, how many times in her life she had held her breath just to avoid offending someone who had already decided she didn't belong. Her fingers twitched once on her knee. She felt it, something inside beginning to crack. Not a breakdown, but a breakaway, a shedding. She had built a career in silence, in knowing when to speak and when to wait. But this was not a moment to wait. Not anymore. Her silence had protected dignity, but it had also protected arrogance. She had endured this flight with grace, but grace without boundaries only fueled the oppressor. She closed her eyes once briefly, as if consulting something ancient within her, and when she opened them, the heat behind her gaze was no longer hidden. "Laura," she said, voice steady, "if you'd like to bring security, do so. But I suggest you ask yourself which passenger is truly disturbing the peace before you involve federal aviation authorities." Laura blinked, unsure whether she was being threatened or warned, and unsure which would be worse. Maya turned forward again, breathing deeper now, her body settling not into submission but preparation, because the line had been crossed. Certainty that the moment had arrived, that the veil of patience had served its purpose, that now, finally, it was time to stop absorbing and start revealing. She reached down slowly and unzipped the slim black case beneath her seat, the same one she had placed there at the start of the flight without drawing attention. Her hands were steady as they moved, no tremble, no hesitation. Randall, watching from the corner of his eye, smirked at the motion. "What now?" he said, half sarcastic. Filing a Yelp complaint midair, but Maya said nothing to him. She opened the case and pulled out a matte leather folder, compact, precise, sealed with a federal-grade clasp. She placed it gently on the tray table. The surrounding rows noticed. Phones lowered. Conversation stopped. Time, in that sliver of space, narrowed to her hands. With deliberate calm, she unclasped the folder and flipped it open. Inside sat a single black ID wallet, embossed with gold lettering, flanked by 2 official documents bearing high-level federal watermarks. She lifted it, unfolded the badge, and laid it flat on the table for all to see. There, resting in the sterile glow of the overhead light, was the unmistakable seal of the United States Supreme Court. The badge gleamed beneath the plastic shield. Below it, the Honorable Maya L. Ellington, Associate Justice, United States Supreme Court, Level 1 clearance, active federal duty. The air left the room in a collective gasp. Laura, the flight attendant, stumbled back a step, her mouth falling open. Randall froze mid-smirk, confusion flickering across his face like a glitch in a corrupted program. Maya finally looked at him. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with the full force of unshakable authority. "You asked me earlier," she said evenly, "if I thought my education gave me the right to sit beside you." Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried through the cabin like a gavel strike. "It didn't." She paused. "The law did." Randall stared at her badge, blinking as if trying to determine whether this was some elaborate performance. But every mark, every signature, every emblem on the credential before him was real. It was the law made tangible. "I'm not only qualified to sit here," Maya continued, her tone cool and absolute. "I am sworn to uphold the very principles you have violated from the moment you stepped onto this aircraft." At that moment, the cockpit door opened with a soft hiss, and Captain Reynolds re-emerged, alerted by the disruption. He saw the folder, he saw the badge, and he went still. "Captain," Maya said without turning, "would you like to continue asking me to compromise my seat for passenger comfort?" The captain's throat moved visibly as he swallowed. His face lost its color. He stepped forward, hands slightly raised, as if in surrender. "Your Honor," he said quietly, we had no idea. We were not informed of your presence." "I deeply apologize for any—" "Spare the apology," Maya interrupted, not harshly, but with finality. "You were informed, just not the way you expected. I fly under classified status for security reasons." The airline was briefed. The manifest was marked. The captain looked toward Laura, whose eyes darted wildly between them, her authority now completely unraveled. You're," Randall stammered, trying to find words in a mouth suddenly too dry to speak. "You're a judge." Maya looked at him fully now. "A Supreme Court justice," she said. "Which means when you mocked my presence, when you questioned my right to be here, you didn't just insult a passenger. You disrespected the judicial authority of this nation." Around them, the other passengers stared in stunned silence. A woman too rose back, gasped, covering her mouth. A man in a business suit leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, "She's one of the 9. The captain, pale and stiff, mumbled something to the lead flight attendant before retreating back toward the cockpit, but not before issuing a final instruction that only Maya and Laura heard. "Comply with every federal protocol from this point forward. No exceptions." Laura nodded mutely, no longer the arbiter of order, but merely a witness to the shift in power. Randall, still seated beside Maya, looked as though his skin no longer fit his frame. His hands clutched the armrests, as if he might be ejected from the plane at any moment, and the confidence that had filled every inch of him now seemed to seep out through invisible cracks. Maya remained composed, her back never leaving the seat, her breathing as even as it had been when he first insulted her. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply turned her head, just enough to face him fully, and said in a voice smooth as glass, "Mr. Drexler, if you still believe power is measured in dollars and influence, I'm here to inform you that you've just committed a federal offense under Title 18, Section 115 of the United States Code." Her words struck like steel. "You have willfully interfered with a sitting justice during official duties in federal airspace, while attempting to leverage influence over airline staff to remove me without cause." Randall's face drained of what little color remained. That's not what this was," he stammered. "I didn't know who you were." Maya's gaze sharpened. "Intent does not negate consequence. Your ignorance is not a defense. You exercised your perceived privilege to attempt the erasure of another person's rights. And you did it loudly, repeatedly, and without shame. That is called abuse of influence. And up here," she tapped the badge gently, "your influence ends." A shuffling sound came from 3 rows back. A man in plain clothes, previously unnoticed, and seated between 2 silent travelers, stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a military cut and eyes that scanned the room like radar. Without speaking, he walked down the aisle and stopped just beside Maya. His voice, when it came, was calm but deeply resonant. "Justice Ellington," he said with a nod. "Protocol Delta 4 activated. You are now under federal protection for the remainder of the flight." Maya nodded once. "Confirmed." The man turned to Laura. "I need you to relocate me to 2C. Immediate proximity required." Laura stammered, "Of course, Agent." Yes. He turned to Randall next, who looked up at him with a mix of panic and disbelief. Sir, I'm going to ask you to remain silent for the duration of this flight, the agent said. Further disruption will result in detainment upon landing. Randall opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The air marshal turned to Maya once more. Would you like him moved? Maya considered this. Her eyes flicked to Randall, now visibly smaller in his seat than he had ever looked in his life. No, she said at last. He'll learn more sitting next to what he once tried to erase. That answer, delivered without malice or vengeance, caused an audible shift in the cabin. Even those who had remained neutral now looked at Maya with a mixture of awe and humility. A woman across the aisle pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "My God." The man who had defended Maya earlier nodded once to himself, visibly moved. Randall, his voice reduced to nothing, remained still, the remnants of his arrogance now clinging to him like a damp shroud. The marshal sat beside Maya in 2C, and though he said nothing further, his presence alone radiated security, not just for Maya, but for the idea of her. The idea that justice had a seat, that silence could hold power, that dignity, when paired with authority, could silence even the loudest tyranny. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reaching our cruising altitude shortly. We'd like to remind passengers that all federal guidelines are being observed. The emphasis on federal wasn't lost on anyone. Maya, seated 2 rows in front of him, didn't even flinch. Her poise was deliberate. She sat straight, hands resting calmly over her tablet. The screen dimmed, message already sent. She had nothing left to say, because everything that needed to be said had already been transmitted. Evidence, contracts, encrypted files, whistleblower reports, all forwarded directly to the Federal Aviation Oversight Committee's encrypted channel. A quiet ding confirmed it had been received. At that moment, a flight attendant approached Randall's seat with composed urgency. Her name tag read Stephanie, and her authority radiated despite the crisp calm in her voice. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to the back of the aircraft. You're disrupting the cabin and have verbally assaulted a federal liaison. Randall turned, eyes bulging, unable to process the lack of deference. I don't think you understand who you're talking to. I'm with Drexler Corporate Affairs. You know, the same company underwriting half the contracts for this route. Stephanie didn't blink. And I'm informing you, Mr. Randall, that you're in violation of FAA Code 121.580, interfering with a federal representative mid-flight. You can move voluntarily, or we'll have to call ahead to have law enforcement waiting at the gate. Your choice. The cabin was dead silent now. Dozens of eyes stared at him, some filming, most wide with fascination or satisfaction. Randall stood with an awkward huff, adjusted his suit jacket, and gathered his briefcase as if trying to salvage dignity. As he shuffled past Maya, he muttered under his breath, "You have no idea what you've started." Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. The moment Randall reached the back row and dropped into the seat, like a defeated monarch stripped of his throne, a young man in business class whispered audibly, "About time someone put that guy in his place." Laughter rippled softly. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the co-pilot received a priority message, flagged from Homeland Security's Oversight Branch. It was a simple directive: maintain normal approach. Hold passengers until further instruction. Federal agents will meet aircraft upon arrival. The captain simply nodded. Whatever was unfolding in the cabin wasn't just another passenger dispute. This was now above their pay grade. Back in first class, Maya opened her tablet again, not to write, but to monitor. The secure channel had responded. Her file had triggered a dormant case tag labeled Operation Blindside. A team from the Department of Transportation's Inspector General had now been assigned. The evidence she supplied not only implicated Randall, but tied Drexler Corp to multiple counts of misappropriated funds and fraudulent claims tied to defense logistics. This flight had become a spark to a much larger fire. Passengers were murmuring, tension giving way to curiosity. Someone leaned over and asked the woman in 1A, "What did he even do?" She replied softly, "Whatever it was, he just messed with the wrong woman." 2 rows back, a corporate lawyer traveling incognito was already drafting a press release on his phone. In the back of the plane, Randall sat quietly, staring straight ahead, still trying to process how fast the narrative had flipped. Just 20 minutes ago, he was barking orders and threatening careers. Now he was in the last row, stripped of authority, invisible. His phone buzzed, but he didn't check it. He already knew what it was: damage control. Too little, too late. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a low, grinding screech as the plane slowed, gliding toward the gate under the fading twilight. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere hung heavy with anticipation. Most passengers remained seated, their eyes darting between the window shades and the aisle, waiting, wondering. In seat 7F, Randall gripped the armrest tightly, jaw locked, pulse thumping behind his eyes. He tried to stay composed, but the sweat at his collar betrayed him. He had checked his phone during the descent, 12 missed calls, one from Drexler Legal Counsel, and a text that simply read, "You've been named." The message said nothing else, but it was enough to crush the last illusion of control. At the front of the aircraft, Maya remained composed, her tablet now shut and tucked neatly into her leather bag. She glanced toward the galley, where the lead attendant Stephanie stood with folded arms and a subtle nod of reassurance. Maya returned it with the faintest smile. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and official. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. There is a brief delay as we await final clearance from ground security. We appreciate your patience." Nobody asked questions. They all knew what this meant. A few even leaned into the moment, phones ready, eyes wide. Through the oval windows, flashing blue and white lights approached slowly. 2 black SUVs pulled up beside the jet bridge. From one of them stepped a tall man in a dark blue suit with a gold badge clipped to his belt. Behind him, 2 plainclothes agents moved briskly toward the loading tunnel. Inside the cabin, silence deepened. Then the door clicked open. The agents stepped on board with quiet authority. The lead agent surveyed the first-class cabin, his eyes locking immediately on Maya. He gave a professional nod. "Ma'am." She stood slowly, offering her credentials, but the agent waved them off gently. "You've done more than enough." He turned to the rest of the passengers, his voice clear but firm. "Please remain seated as we conclude official business. This will only take a moment." Then, without fanfare, he walked the aisle until he reached the back of the plane. "Randall Huxley?" Randall didn't answer immediately. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. "Yes," he muttered. The agent's voice didn't shift. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, violation of federal airspace protocols, and suspicion of participating in corporate fraud under ongoing investigation. Please stand and place your hands where I can see them." A stunned hush swept through the rows. Passengers craned their necks. Someone whispered, "Is that really happening?" Another replied, "It's him. It's that guy who yelled at the woman." Randall stood slowly, his legs unsteady. His hands rose in slow surrender as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. One of the agents read him his rights, voice low but deliberate. Randall didn't resist. He couldn't. As they escorted him past the rows of watching eyes, a few passengers began to clap, first softly, then louder in rhythm. Others joined in, hesitant at first, but then with rising confidence, as if collectively agreeing that justice had, indeed, landed. As Randall passed Maya's row, he couldn't meet her eyes. She didn't need to look at him. Her silence spoke volumes. One of the passengers near the front leaned toward the man next to him and whispered, "She didn't just stand her ground. She changed the altitude for all of us." The man nodded. "She didn't need to prove anything. She is the proof." When Maya stepped off the plane moments later, the applause still echoed faintly behind her. The air outside smelled of jet fuel and possibility. She walked calmly through the tunnel, past the agents, past the chaos, past the blinking news alerts that had already begun flashing on nearby monitors. Federal investigation opens into Drexler Corporation source, confirmed from onboard whistleblower. Outside, a sleek black sedan waited. The driver opened the door, but before stepping in, Maya paused, looked up the sky, and exhaled, not relief, but resolve. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Back on the tarmac, federal agents spoke in hushed tones while media vans began to circle the perimeter, sniffing the scent of scandal. Inside the terminal, several passengers remained near the windows, watching the scene unfold. One young woman recorded a voice memo on her phone. Note to self: never underestimate a quiet woman with a purpose. Maya entered the car, and it pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the neon wash of city lights. The headlines would explode by morning. Drexler would scramble for damage control. But none of that mattered now. She had done what needed to be done. No spotlight, no theatrics, just quiet, strategic justice. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss another powerful moment like this. We share real justice, bold characters, and the kind of endings that stick with you long after the last line. Where in the world are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And tell us, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it Randall's downfall, Maya's quiet strength, or the moment the cabin clapped? Let's talk about it below.